You are listening to The Darker Sides of Life, a podcast by Hexekami. Welcome to another episode of The Darker Sides of Life. I'm your host Camilla, aka Hexekami if you know me from Instagram. Today's episode is about friendships, and primarily a reflection of how I maintain them, what they are, and why friendships to me personally can be quite the challenge. Last episode I used my scale of grief, and I want to pull that out again because I think we often tend to neglect that friendships, and especially breaking up with a friend, can be just as difficult and painful as breaking up with a partner. But since friendships are not relationships, they aren't deemed as serious, and thus we don't very often ask people who are going through a breakup with a friend how they're doing, which is more common to do if someone is breaking up with a partner. So in the scale of grief, I think it's safe to say that society wants friendship grief to be pretty low on the scale, and I don't think that's right. We should take it more seriously. Okay, so when that is said and done, I will go on to talk a bit more about me and my own experience with friendships, breaking away from friends, and how getting friends as an adult can be a challenge, especially for me because of my history. So, how many friends do I have? Not very many. And I very rarely see the few one could call friends. But why is that? I have thought about it intensively over the last couple of years, because while I am very aware that I am an introvert and therefore don't need as much social company like others may do, I also know that I have often felt lonely. So again, why don't I have friends like I see other people have friends? And the answer to that is both simple and also very complicated. As I said, I don't have a lot of friendships. And I find it difficult to get new, lasting ones because of my history. I've mentioned it before, but for a long time, my nearest friend, my closest friend, my best friend was death. We connected when we met for the first time when my mum died. And as impossible this friendship is to describe to people who have not met death, and also to those who may have met death but didn't strike up a proper conversation, just as important is this very friendship to understand when I talk about friendships and the lack thereof. Because I am just so different from my peers, and I'm different in a way that can be equally interesting and equally unattractive. Let me try to explain what I mean. I cannot count the amount of times I have met people who I've started talking to and thus initiated some sort of friendship with, up until the point where I felt that they were treating me more as a therapist than as a friend. It usually happens like this. I meet someone, we bond over something we have in common. We then arrange to meet in private and bond more, or whatever, and then we do this a couple of times. And at one point, I realize that our conversations are not about the thing we bonded over any longer. It's not about other things we could bond over. It's them sharing their worries, their problems, their troubles in a way where they want my advice. But it's also in a way that if I reverse the roles, they pull away from me. I have discussed this very issue with my therapist many times, because at one point I started thinking that there must be something wrong with me, that maybe I wasn't very likable. I was perhaps only good for the advice giving, and not good for the stuff I think makes for a good friendship, such as doing things together that are not always involving problems that need solving. And that made me really upset. I wanted a friend. Also in plural, friends. And I didn't understand why I kept getting the same results every time. What was I doing wrong? What I'm about to say now is not meant as a please feel sorry for me kind of thing. Not at all. Nothing in this podcast is about that. I hope that this is pretty clear. It's about sharing the darker sides of life in a way where we can hopefully feel less alone with whatever dark matter we are dealing with. So when I say what I will say now, I want you to try and listen to it without feeling sorry for me, because then the point gets lost in translation. What my therapist and I figured out together is that because I have met death at such a young age, because I grew up with a father who was very abusive and whose behavior led me to getting PTSD, because I had to grow up very fast at age 8 in order to survive my situation. I am fundamentally different in a way that is almost incompatible with the standard person. My brain is simply wired in a different manner, and so I see the world, life, social interactions, humans, feelings, experiences, etc., in a different light than the vast majority. And this very difference makes me equally amazing for people to confide in, and equally impossible to truly bond with, because I am both and nothing. I am both the wisest person they have met emotionally, and so they can get perspectives on their own situations that are mature and helpful, and I am nothing because I do not relate to them in a true and meaningful way. Because I am older somehow. I'm not 29, like my birth certificate states. I am 800. I am 1000. I am 1,000,000 years old, because that is what death does to you. It makes you older, truly, very much older. I have this saying I sometimes joke about with my husband. If I have done something where I have helped someone and they ask me the inevitable, they always ask me, which is, "How come you are so wise?" Then I jokingly say to my husband afterwards, "Maybe it's the old soul, maybe it's childhood trauma." And we have a good laugh, especially because it's obviously not funny, but we have to laugh. I have to laugh. It's the tragic comic downside to having this so-called wisdom, that it comes with a price, and I have paid it in tenfolds. If you're currently listening to this and not understanding what I mean, then I totally get that. I know what I'm saying sounds a bit bonkers. Saying it makes me cringe almost, because the imposter in me is saying, "Hold up now, Camilla, don't act like you are so wise. Please, you're not wise. No one thinks that. Calm yourself." But I have to try and ignore that imposter syndrome, because the reality is that this is my life. This is the experience I have every time I meet someone new. It's like the Ouroboros, the serpent biting its own tail, a cycle that I have a hard time breaking away from. I have tried many things to change this. I have tried not sharing my background story and being vague when people have asked me about my family situation. I have also tried the opposite, sharing it as fast as possible in order to try and remove the stigma about it and make it less shocking to others. I have tried not to give advice when asked, just saying, "I don't have any good insights to this," and I have tried to share less about myself and let them share more. I have tried sharing more than what they have shared. I have tried changing the subject when I felt the therapist dynamic creeping in, because quite frankly, it exhausts me. I love to help other people, it's not that. I just don't enjoy being the one helping and never being the one helped in a friendship situation. It's not a healthy foundation to build a friendship on, at least not in my opinion. And then there's another thing that's hard for me to say, because I think it makes me sound so cold. But I'm here to share the darker sides of life, and so it makes no sense withholding information I think is relevant to the episodes, and that is the fact that I can sometimes have a hard time relating to the life my peers are living. I remember the shift, if we can call it that, coming rather abruptly when I was in the beginning of my 20s. Then I was studying. My peers were studying. We were young, often looking for a path in our life, which I want to jump in and say is not something I think one can be done with, but for the sake of the narrative, I'll mention it here. And also, we were settling down with a partner, moving in together, slowly finishing our studies, and getting a job. And whilst all this was happening, life happened, right? So that of course included all the worries, the obstacles, the problems that life generates, such as not getting the grade we want, not having a romantic partner, not having the job one wants, not knowing when one should move in together when one does find the partner, not being able to agree on how to decorate the flat one is now sharing with one's partner, not agreeing on when one should try to have children, and whilst all of these obstacles are of course valid and important and true and understandable, I think to me, on a personal level, they a lot of the time are so difficult to relate to because of the issues that have been closest to me. Because those issues were living in fear of my father, not even knowing when he would explode in rage, believing that one day he would kill me, growing up, dealing with a mum who died and a father who refused to talk about her, being restricted in all I did, being denied food, denied sleep, denied playtime because my father wanted me to work in the garden, in the attic, in the basement, improving the home he was never in because he was an airline pilot, but resilient that everyone around us, our neighbors, were to look at our house with envy. Growing up, not knowing where my sister was because she had run away from home, and having a father who just stopped mentioning her. Awakening one night when I had been sent to boarding school, to my phone ringing, with my sister on the other end, trying to take her own life, and describing to me how she was doing it, only for me to call my father, who at that point lived in Canada, for him to say I was lying and then hanging up. It's like I was brought up speaking Latin in a world where others were taught Chinese. I have learned the basic Chinese vocabulary now, but my brain still thinks in Latin. This is a good time to mention the scale of grief again, because this is naturally when one might say that I am now contradicting myself. Am I not just now saying that because my experiences have been the ones they have, that I cannot possibly relate to people who haven't experienced them because their problems are somehow less extreme than mine? And no, that is in fact not what I'm saying. I do believe that pain cannot be compared. It cannot be measured on a scale, and it cannot be put into a system. It cannot be judged. So I'm not doing any of those things. I'm just stating that in my experience, I cannot speak the language that people around me are speaking, and that makes it difficult for me to find meaningful relationships. Because my brain thinks in Latin. It speaks Latin to me, and I speak Latin to it. And I also speak Chinese with a strong Latin accent, which leads me right back to the Ouroboros. My Latin accent is interesting to others. It sounds wise. It's appealing and unattractive at the same time. So how does this relate to you? Well, I hope it does relate to you if you too are struggling with friendships, especially as an adult. I want to say you're not alone in this. I can sometimes find myself in a rabbit hole where it seems to me that everyone else is just having the time of their lives, friendships-wise, as if friends are so easy to come by, and they get them just by blinking. And I don't think that's true. Not always. Definitely not to everyone. I think friendships, as an adult, is a rare thing, and if you are dealing with something similar to me and want my advice, yes, I am aware of the irony of me giving advice when I've just went on and on about how advice giving is not always what I enjoy the most in a friendship situation. Then it is to trust yourself. If the new acquaintance you have met doesn't feel right for you, then it is okay to go somewhere else. You are important and should find social situations that you enjoy and benefit from. So saying no is a good tool to have. I've been practicing this for the last couple of years, and while I still think I'm lonely a lot of the time, I also think I'm better at knowing what is good for me and what isn't. And that is, to me, the most important friend you're taking care of right there. Yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you also struggle with friendships? How are you dealing with it? Let me know your thoughts. You can reach me via mail, via Instagram, or you can post your thoughts and comments on the Ko-fi page. Links are in the description, as always. Until next week, please take care and remember that you are never alone in the darker sides of life. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd very much appreciate it if you'd take a moment to share it with your friends and leave a review and rating on iTunes. It helps me reach more people, and the only thing I want is to reach those who need someone to tell them they're not alone in the darker sides of life. I also have a Ko-fi page, so you can donate a few bucks there if you want to help me continuing doing this kind of audio content. The link for that will also be in the description box to this episode. Thank you for helping me and this podcast get out there. You've been listening to The Darker Sides of Life, a podcast by Hexekami.